Every day, Min and I answer a question about work.
And today is day 109. And this week we've been answering questions about pay and compensation and what's right or what's tough about them. So today we're going to break down the following. Do I take a lower salary for a job that I really want and am qualified for?
And Min, you had a particular kind of an anecdote of where this came up, because I think the answer is maybe. It depends how much you want it and how much lower is the salary. Yeah. But there are some cases where the answer is definitely yes and definitely no, or go about it in the following way. So this goes in the it depends chapter. But what was the specific circumstance here?
Well, it came up in the context of a conversation where it was a woman. I don't know if that plays a role, but certainly it was in the context of she had interviewed for a job that she was very qualified for, and it sounded like the company was really excited to hire her. And they asked about what her expectations around compensation. And she had already known going in what the range was because it had been like posted on their like website or something.
And so yesterday, you're allowed by law in certain states to ask.
Correct.
So she knew. Okay.
Correct. And so she named her, expectations around the higher end. And now she was in this moment. She hadn't heard back in a few days, and then she noticed that the page had updated the comp band or the range on their website. And so she now wondered, oh, am I not going to get hired because I'm too expensive? And in that case, should I go back and say I'd be willing to take a different, lower compensation? And so I just thought that was a really interesting.
Yeah. So, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. That was the context.
In that case, it's the lower salary is relative to what I requested, as Correct. Opposed to relative to what I'm necessarily making in my current job. So, the thing I'd say about that is, so let's take this instance where you have willingness to do a job for a lower pay than they might be willing to pay you. And of course, the company on some level sometimes wants to figure out how to pay you as little as possible. Good companies try to figure out how to pay you fairly regardless, but the company on some level tries to figure out how to pay you as little as possible, subject to what's fair. And so many people end up in this place where they contemplate negotiating against themselves, saying, oh, I know I said X, but what about 0.9X? And the reason that they do that is, and I'm sure gender is relevant to this. So I'm not going to pretend that this is going to be the same for a woman or for me, but I frequently see people negotiate against themselves, and the main reason they do it is fear. They're afraid that if I don't do this, I might not get the job. And there's almost always an intermediate step. So here's an example of an intermediate step, which is you don't have to accept the lower salary as the first step. Get some information. And the way to get information here might be to call the person and say, hey, I know I said X, and the posted range on the job was this, and then I noticed you guys changed the range. What happened? And then they might say something about like, oh, we realized something. It'll give you information, then you can decide. And in general, I think there's also always, whenever you make an ask, there's the headline of the ask. And this is true if you're buying a company or making a salary. And then there is the concreteness of the ask. And what I mean by that is there's a huge difference between I would like to be paid $100,000 a year and fuck you if you don't pay me that, versus I'd like to be paid $100,000 a year, but I understand that the way this job works is you've got to be fair and find comparables and blah, blah, blah. And so I'm a reasonable person. I'm doing this not just for the money. Tell me, let's talk about it. And one is set in concrete, in fact, highly aggressive, expletive-laden concrete. And the other one is set in feathers. And in between, there's 1,000 hardnesses that you could choose that will give the company openness to come back. And I think that it's not just about the ask, it's also about the music with which you deliver it, i.e. the concreteness. So those are a few of my thoughts on this. The harder question, of course, is how much of a pay cut should you ultimately be willing to accept for a job that you want? Let's do that question another day.
Totally. And I totally agree, right? There's no reason to negotiate against yourself until you have new information. And so that was sound, not advice given. You've got Roy and me from Bloomberg Beta. We are here to answer your questions about work. So if you have other ones, reply to us here.
Yeah, and remember, the reason that we call this is not advice, is because most people when they're giving advice, they're trying to tell you how to live their life, And we just want to give you what we see so that you can live yours. So we'll be back